Greetings, fellow listener. I will be your guide as we turn back the hands of time and space and dive into the obscure. Tonight's destination, 1979 for Monstroid. Strap in and enjoy the ride. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jacob K. Baker for Atomic Stick Figure Productions. And today on ObscuReview, we will be discussing the 1979 monster movie, Monstroid. It Came from the Lake. Last G-Fest, I brought this film up to a few people, figuring who else would know about this movie except other giant monster movie fans. The thing is, though, every time I brought up this film, I kept getting the same response. What's Monstroid? I didn't realize that this movie was as obscure as it was, as I had seen it years ago on television on TNT's Monster Vision as I stayed up to catch Ultra 7, and figured that other kaiju fans had heard of it too. It's not too difficult to track down either. In fact, there's 2 copies of it here on YouTube. If you want to see the movie before I spoil anything, go ahead and watch the film. For the rest of you that have seen it, or don't care if I ruin anything, then kick back and get ready for an interesting trip. Originally supposed to be released in 1971, the production suffered from various issues and the film wasn't able to be completed until 1979. That's really kind of the only interesting background thing I could find on the film, so yeah. Now I know the movie as Monstroid, but it's also known as Monstroid, It Came from the Lake, Monster, Toxic Monster, and a ton of other titles that I refuse to write down because there's like 20 of them. Unlike the Milpitas Monster, this film actually has a few named actors in it. Of note, the film features James Mitchum as Travis, a worker for a cement manufacturing plant in Colombia, Philip Carey as his boss Barnes, Anthony Isley as Pete, a fellow worker at the plant, and John Carradine himself as the local priest. Does having actual actors within this film make it better than the Milpitas Monster? Well, we'll save that conversation until after the synopsis. Speaking of which, I guess it's what we should get into next. Here we go. The film starts up and we get a couple of text cards stating that the film is based on true events. Bullshit. Oh, sorry, I have no idea what came over me. Next up we get a sequence of Maria Reyes. She's important to the plot. Kinda. Dancing around in the middle of the woods and her husband just lays there. Good man. Hot chick dancing around and you just lay there. Whatever. As they carry on like this, the scene is interspliced with footage of something stalking them in the darkness. Before long, the monster attacks, kills the guy, and Maria passes out from terror. Cue the title card and opening credits. After some establishing shots of random American city, we cut to the head office of a cement manufacturing agency and we meet the company's owner Barnes, his secretary, and Travis. Here Barnes shows Travis a slideshow of various people, the plant in Colombia, and of course goes over the pertinent plot points. Here we learn that Maria Reyes has survived the encounter with the monster, no one believes her, and everyone in the town believes that she's a witch. Kind of a big leap there, but hey, small towns, man. We also learn that the company is being boycotted by the radical activist Victor Sanchez, and that a female reporter named Patty Clark is giving all kinds of bad publicity to the facility. Barnes says that he needs someone to look over things in Colombia, and Travis is just the man to do it. Cut to Colombia, where we meet Patty as she's doing a news report on the toxins from the plant and how they're running into the various local water sources. Next, we get a couple of kids, or teenagers, I'm not really quite sure, I'll just call them kids, goofing around near the lake with their dog. As they're talking, the boy notices something in the water and informs his sister that he just saw a monster. As per usual in these kinds of films, his sister doesn't believe him, and after some dialogue, they both decide to leave. As they walk off, the dog stays behind for a few seconds, staring at the lake until the monster makes a noise and scares him off. Back in town, Patty is talking to the mayor where he introduces her to his daughter Juanita, who happens to be a helicopter pilot. We then cut inside of the local church where the priest is going on about how the cement factory is ruining the ecosystem. While he goes on, Victor Sanchez enters and sits down next to a fellow activist, and they have a nice little conversation, which then transitions to footage of children torturing a cow. Not really sure what the context of this scene is supposed to be, but whatever. After we get done with this, it cuts to Maria, who is visiting her husband's grave, where she has a flashback of the night that he died. A group of the citizens notice her appearance and decide to stone her. 'Cause she's a witch, you know. After taking a few rocks to the face, she runs for the cemetery entrance and collapses. Oddly enough, when she falls, the mob decide to just stop in the tracks, leaving the scene quite anticlimactic. At the airport, Travis arrives and is met by none other than Juanita, who gives him a lift to their small little town. Back in town, there is a fiesta going on, and we're treated to some of the cast enjoying themselves. Here we get to meet a young lady called Laura, who meets up with Pete. After some dialogue, we discover that Pete is seeing another lady, who happens to be Juanita, and that it's over between them. Then Pete walks away and leaves Laura to wallow in her self-pity. The helicopter lands, and almost immediately Travis is assaulted by Patty, who goes through the typical "you're a business dude, you're obviously evil" shtick, but Travis blows her off, and he and the guy that he's with just drive away. Thinking about it, how did Patty go from the Fiesta to the landing site so quickly? Anywho, time has passed, and it is now nighttime, and we see Laura skinny dipping in the lake. We get some POV shots of the monster stalking her underwater, and then Laura is alerted to some sounds in the woods. Turns out to be Pete, and Laura decides to stroll out of the lake, and her and Pete decide to do the nasty. While the oinking and boinking is going on, we cut back to the Fiesta where the church congregation is performing in the street. Getting back to the two on the beach, Laura has miraculously gotten dressed in a swimsuit while Pete puts his shirt back on. Pete then tells Laura that it's over for realsies and wanders off. Damn, breakup sex, that's brutal. Laura sits there in her own lament when something in the woods spooks her. Turns out it was just a goat. But before she can relax, the monster sneaks up, picks her up, and noms her bottom half off, leaving the torso on the beach. Man, dealing with a breakup after being boinked and being eaten? This chick has had one rough day. In the morning, the entirety of the cast is at the lake investigating the corpse, which is of course being covered by Patty. Pete, in the meantime, is being consoled about the situation by Doc. Don't get used to him. He is only in this scene, and that's it. At this point, everyone starts discussing what actions can be taken to prevent this from happening again. In the woods, the kids are walking along and run into Pete and Travis, and start inquiring into the Laura situation. Here, the kids are introduced to Travis, and the boy makes mention of the monster in the water. Shift to Travis, getting water samples from the plant runoff, who is met by Sanchez, who goes through the typical Americans are evil and so is industry jive. Then both men go on their merry ways. In town, Patty is talking to the priest, who gives his 2 cents about why things are happening, and then starts talking to Anne, apparently one of the workers' wives, and about the town superstitions, which garners the attention of both Travis and the mayor, who then proceed to bitch out Patty and confiscate the tape. Travis then phones headquarters and has a bit of dialogue with the secretary before talking with Barnes. Travis wants to use sonar on the lake, and Barnes says that he'll have some equipment shipped to them. Barnes then gets into contact with Patty's boss and basically tells him to put a leash on her before she has a chance to ruin the company. We then get this unnecessarily long sequence of Travis, the mayor, and Patty talking about cutting a deal to still do the report, and then some dialogue about how Sanchez is using the current events to aid in his cause. As this is going on, the kids walk up on the equipment that Travis has set up and discuss using their dad's camera to photograph the monster. The girl says she'll have no part of it and won't help him. But then we get a shot of them later that night, walking towards the lake. A person eating their own words. Hilarious! Ha ha ha! Back in town, yet another fiesta is going on, and Travis and Patty are enjoying themselves. An antagonistic environmentalist and an industrialist who's just doing his job getting along? Weird. We then see Pete and Juanita discussing going back to his office and keeping an eye on the monitor. Translation, they're gonna do it. And do. Nice to know they're so concerned about monitoring the readout. While yet more Beast with 2 backing is going on, the kids are still at the lake, waiting for the monster to appear. Suddenly, a couple of drunk fishermen, is there any other kind, row up in a boat and startle the boy, much to his sister's delight. But before long, the monster does appear and scares off the kids who, while running, take pictures. The fishermen in the boat are not as fortunate and end up getting snarfed. The next morning, Travis wanders out of the bathroom back to bed, revealing that he and Patty did indeed spend the night together, and then shifts to the kids in their dad's developing room where they look over the photos they took. The kids and the entire cast meet up in the mayor's office where they show the slides to everyone, and Pete decides to use explosives to take out the monster. Good man, Pete. As night falls, Sanchez is setting up dynamite at the plant's runoff while an angry mob chases after Maria because they decided that it was time to barbecue a witch because they believe she's responsible for the monster. The priest steps up and tells the mob to halt their idea and instead pray for Maria, which they do. Back at the plot, Travis goes over his plan of obliterating the monster by stuffing dynamite into an animal carcass and blowing it up from the inside. While this is going on, Sanchez lights the dynamite he placed, but gets his foot caught, preventing him from leaving and gets blown into pieces. Maria tries defending herself to the mob, who decide that the priest's idea just isn't working and torture her anyways. The next day, Pete and Travis inspect the damage at the plant and mention how, even though she's badly burnt, Maria is in fact alive and at a hospital. We then get footage of a helicopter taking off, and Juanita and a cop radio the helicopter to meet them in a certain spot. We then see Pete sewing dynamite into a sheepskin while Juanita hijacks the helicopter and leaves the pilots with the cop. Juanita picks up the cast, save for Patty, and they all fly out towards the lake to deploy the plan. Over the lake, Travis lowers the sheepskin from the helicopter and begins fishing for the monster. Before too long, the monster arrives and takes the bait, but Travis ends up dropping the detonator into the lake. You had one job! Travis is left with no other option and dives into the lake to look for the detonator. Seeing that Travis is in need of help, the cop from earlier, where the pilots went we'll never know, gets into a boat and distracts the beast by jousting with it with an oar. Classic. Travis does eventually locate the detonator, and after the cop gets to a safe distance, blows the monster to Kingdom Come. As Patty gives a BS monologue, the helicopter lands, and Travis and the cop make it back to the shore. What I assume is supposed to be the following day, the kids are seen walking through the woods again with their dog, who wanders off on his own and discovers an egg. The dog paws at it a bit, and then the egg rolls down the hill, where it begins to hatch. The camera then pans over, revealing a nest with a ton of eggs. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Monstroid. It came from the lake. Let's just dive into my final thoughts on this one. I've spent 3 days analyzing this turkey and don't want to spend any more time thinking about it. First off, let's talk about the rating. This movie is rated R, but it's rated R for some odd reasons. The violence isn't really anything more than what you'd get on television. I mean, when MST showed The Incredible Melting Man, they left in a lot of gore from that movie, and it was quite a bit ickier than this one. There's the sequence where Laura's skinny dipping, but you can see a lot more flesh watching the televised Jaws than you do here. So why is this movie R? The only reason I can foresee for this movie's rating is Barnes' foul language. I suspect that the only reason he's as mouthy as he is just so the film can be R. Well, I have another speculation about this, but we'll get to that in a bit. The main gripe, well, one of the main gripes anyway, is that this movie doesn't do anything we haven't seen before. It's chock full of anti-American industrialist pro-environmental nonsense that we've gotten in other movies. And while I can say that I've never gotten anything from these kinds of message films, I can say that other films of this type did what they wanted a heck of a lot better than this one. Along with this, the film can't even make up its mind if this is in fact the kind of film that it wants to be. All throughout the film, most of the cast is trying to convince us that the cement factory is a bad thing, but when the proverbial shit hits the fan, that's the industrialists who take charge and handle the situation. Add to this the fact that everyone against the facility is just so two-faced it's not even funny. The reporter Patty started off with the pure I hate industrialist attitude, but before the last reel she ends up in a relationship with Travis, the embodiment of everything she's against. Sanchez's entire character revolved around wanting the plant gone, but tried to blow up the facility, making himself an industrial terrorist. Even in this day and age, that's not the kind of character you use to make your point with. Now, the priest came the closest to making me side with the environmentalist angle, as he made a lot of good points. But then the congregation under him ignore his pleas as well as Maria's and commence to burn her at a stake, making the religious aspect completely moot, which leads me to the cast. First off, let's talk about the kids. Usually in monster movies, the kids are the most annoying thing in them. Not the case here. The kids in this film didn't bother me one bit. They were bland as all get out, but they didn't bother me. As for Pete and Travis, there's not really anything too special about them that warrants me going into their characters. Even if they were played by actors who were well known at the time, that didn't save their characters from being bland. I didn't outright hate either of them, but they were still uninteresting. This brings us to the priest. Good old John Carradine. Much like another of my favorite character actors, Dick Miller, John had a tendency to act in a lot of terrible films. But the man went where the money was, so I can't blame him. As for the role, well, there wasn't really much to his character that I can really point at and say, that was well done. Much like the rest of the cast, he's just sort of typical. Now let's talk about Barnes. At first, Barnes confused me because of his aforementioned foul mouth. Then I hit upon a realization. The makers of this film are trying to make his character unappealing to the audience because he's the owner of a business. Ever since the late 60s, filmmakers tried and still try their hardest to make capitalists seem like bad people. And for the day, foul language wasn't as accepted by the masses as it is now. His character is crass and sleazy. Again, pretty run-of-the-mill for this type of film. This leads us to the female half of the cast. I will refer to this part of the review as "This movie hates women." I have no idea what the writer was thinking, but after a lot of thought, I think this movie would probably piss me off even more if I had a set of ovaries. Patty is your typical tough-as-nails reporter, but only when the camera is on her. When she's not doing a report, she's actually a pretty decent human being. I figured the reason for this was because she was dedicated to her job, which is pretty commendable. She wants the facts, she'll try her best to get them. Only problem is that she lets her views get in the way and acts more like a bitch than just a dedicated reporter. Movie makers need to understand that written into the DNA of everyone with a pulse is a disdain for in-your-face reporters. Even though I liked her towards the end, it still didn't prevent her character from being incredibly obnoxious for a good chunk of the film. Juanita, well, there's not really a lot to go into about her. I mean, she's a pilot, and that's about all we get out of her. I liked her character, but she just didn't really add anything to the situation. Now let's talk about Anne. If memory serves right, she's the mother of the two kids in the film. As she's an American woman in a foreign country, they play her character off as being rather racist. Outside of her being married to one of the factory workers, I don't remember if the film specifically states who, and considering the locals as being backward superstitious types, we don't really learn much about her. Now we get to the characters that piss me off the most. Well, they don't piss me off, but rather the events around them and how they're treated does. First off is Laura. Laura is dumped, used for a breakup shag, and then gets eaten in half. Why do this to her character? Seriously! From the dialogue within the film, she's not a bad person, and a lot of the people liked her, so why treat her character in such a distasteful way? It's almost as if the writer developed her just to suffer. And after she's been killed off, there's a bit of dialogue about how horrible her loss is. But as soon as the kids get done talking to Pete about the situation, she's never mentioned again. I get that Pete is with Juanita now, but her death could have been used as a reason for him to want the monster dead as opposed to, it's gonna do more stuff, let's blast it. This brings us to my favorite character in the steaming pile of a film, and the one that's given the most disrespect, Maria. Honestly, I feel that this film should have followed her. She's a truly sympathetic character and easily the one I connected with the most. She suffered the loss of her husband, got mislabeled by the town for something she's in no way responsible for, and is eventually disfigured by the ignorant citizens. Why? No, seriously, why? Why do this to this character? After spending far more time thinking about this than I should have, I determined the answer to simply be deep hurting. That's a reference to MST3K where they're forced to watch Lost Continent. In that movie, rock climbing is used to pad out the film as the filmmakers needed to justify it having a feature-length time frame. That is the exact reason why Maria and the follies against her are shown. She's not pertinent to the plot at all, and she is just there to fill out screen time. They created this woman specifically to suffer. Dick move, movie. Dick move. With the cast out of the way, let's discuss the effects. What effects are there are pretty decent. The monster's head, back, tail, and one of its claws are full-sized props, the majority of which are used to show this creature swimming while the helicopter looms overhead, which isn't a bad effect. Along with these is a hand puppet of the beast, which is okay. The construction seems to be pretty good, but I think the biggest problem is the design. Now, I do like the design. It's one of my favorite sea creature designs, actually. Anything with a Fu Manchu mustache gets my support. It's even got sort of a horror of Party Beach look to it. Problem is, it looks kinda derpy. Kinda like it belongs in a Sid and Marty Krofft show. I can easily see this thing being the Sleestak god. My only real complaint is that the creature has far too little screen time. It only takes up a couple minutes of footage, which is a shame. If the story had been any good, I wouldn't find the limited screen time as an issue. But with the film being as drawn out, boring, and uninteresting as it is, it would have fared far better if they would have just cut out the propaganda BS and just made it a killer monster in a lake affair. Is there any reason to watch this movie? As far as I'm concerned, no. Feel free to watch it if you want. I mean, you may be able to get far more out of it than I did. I mean, personally, I'd rather have a midget punch me in the groin repeatedly for 2 hours than watch this again anytime soon. Then again, it does depend on the mindset that you're in. I suppose that if you were drunk, or high or something, and with a group of people watching it specifically to riff on something, then this movie is perfect for that purpose. This brings us to my final rating. I'm going to give this movie 2 separate ratings. My first rating is a 2. When I first rewatched this movie, I didn't put a lot of stock into the elements of the film and thought that since it had actors in it and a bigger budget, that it would fare better than the Milpitas Monster. After spending a couple of days typing out my synopsis and thoughts on the film, I wanted this to be a bit more professional than my first couple reviews. I was able to spend a lot more time thinking about the film. 3 days is far too long to spend thinking about this movie. The more I thought about it, the more it pissed me off. So my second rating, after analyzing this film as much as I did, and realizing just how horrible this piece of tripe is, I now award this movie a death's head. And a middle finger for good measure. The only other movie to piss me off to this extent in recent years is the second Battle Royale movie. The first one is in my top 5 favorite movies list, but the second one, as well as this piece of garbage, are nestled firmly in my top 5 worst movies of all time rating. And I like a lot of crappy movies, too. Anywho, now that this experiment into pain is over, I think I'll let you guys get on with your lives. Join me next time when I will be reviewing my first animated feature. I haven't yet decided which one I want to go with first. It'll probably be The Flying Ghost Ship, but it might be Gulliver's Travels into Outer Space. I haven't really decided yet. I'll just let it be a surprise for you guys. At any rate, as always, this is Jacob K. Baker for Atomic Stick Figure Productions. May all of you have a pleasant evening, and may God bless.